Good morning. Thank you again for having me as part of this meeting. Again, Jordan Clayton. I'm the supervisor of the Utah Snow Survey, here to provide a snowpack and water supply update. And the conditions, as you'll see over the course of the next 15-20 minutes, however long we'll talk, are pretty extreme. And so let's go through some specifics. Starting with the maps that I show at all of these meetings, where we have the major basins of Utah colored by the percent normal of their snowpack. These data are taken from 140 snow-tall sites that are spread throughout Utah's mountains. And those snow-tall sites are colored as well by the percent normal. This is as a percent of median. And so we're looking at everything in red being less than 50% of normal. We have some numbers that are well below 50%, as I'll dive into. We don't really have anywhere in the state at this point that's looking positive or close to normal. When we compare to where we were last year at this time, you can see the last year's major basins on the left side and this year's major basins on the right side. There are a couple places that are doing better than last year, but that's just because last year the southwest corner of the state was in really extreme poor snowpack state. And so other than that, the rest of the state is about the same or significantly worse than where we were last year at this time. Although it may feel like we're alone in this, we're not. That's a clever road sign that was on one of the highways in Utah just recently, but unfortunately there's a large swath of the west that's also experiencing this pain to varying degrees. You can see the percent normal for the Huck 6 basins across the west as is shown here. If we combine all of Utah's snow-tall sites into one graph, we get this unfortunate looking graph that we're looking at right here where the current conditions are shown by the black line. You can see how that compares to normal with the green line and all the range of previous observations. If we get below the bottom of this graph, that means that we're breaking records. Currently 58% of normal, which is only the second percentile, meaning that we've been better than this 98% of the time, and this is bordering on uncharted territory. We do still have about 2 months to go until our typical peak snowpack, but we have a lot of catching up to do, as I'll talk about. Unfortunately, we look to be on track to start breaking new records for minimum snowpack starting in the next few days. We know that there's not significant enough snow coming to the state, so we will be breaking records again within the next 2 or 3 days, and we'll be outside of the range of these previous observations. The record-breaking conditions should continue until perhaps around the 10th or so of February, where we're hoping that we'll get some storm activity. I'll talk more about that at the end of the presentation. Now, I know we just referenced, Jolie mentioned maybe only about a 30% chance of catching up to a normal snowpack peak. Unfortunately, that number has gotten worse. We're now looking at only about a 20% chance of that happening. We also have increased the potential to stay in record-breaking territory, about 20% chance that our peak, if we project from here forward, will also be a new record low snowpack peak for the state. If we compare where we're at as a state as of yesterday compared to all the previous statewide totals going back to 1981, that's what's shown here. So in each one of these bars, the statewide snow water equivalent is shown by the height of that bar. And then you can also see where that year peaked with those little triangles. So the bars show where the state was at as of yesterday, each one of those years. And then you can see where, again, that year peaked. You can also see how that compares to normal with those upper green lines for the normals for the peaks, and the lower green line is the normal for that day. If we organize this by total, we see that 2026 is right in line with 1981 and 2018 for the worst 3 years that we've had as of this time. Unfortunately, all the years that were around this much going back in time all peaked well below normal. 2014 did a little bit better, but of course we're trying to be optimistic about this. So let's dive into the specific numbers in terms of departures from normal for our snowpack. These are the individual snow-tall sites here, not colored by percent normal, but here these are the inches below where they should be for this time of year. So you're seeing everything in red is 5 inches or more of snow water equivalent, not snow depth, but that's the water equivalent of the snowpack in those locations. That's a lot of snow that we're behind. I estimate it would take about 5 to 6 good statewide storms to catch up, of course, above and beyond what we already should be getting moving forward. So we would need to have 5 or 6 extra storms, if you will, above and beyond the background frequency of storms that we should be getting. Where we see those little green dots in terms of the departures from normal, those are places that are still close to normal in terms of their water equivalent. Those are mostly our highest elevation sites. There's actually a really good relationship right now between where we have the highest elevation, which is shown on the y-axis here, and where we have the highest percent normal, which is the x-axis. There are some exceptions, but by and large, as we get into the highest elevation sites, that's where we're still storing pretty good snow. Tri-Lake's still doing okay, for example. But there's a strongward negative trend as we move to the left. A lot of records being broken by our snow-tell sites. Everything in red is at record low snow water equivalent for this day. Everything in orange is second lowest on record. Combined, that makes up 25% of all of our sites in the state of Utah are breaking records. This was as of yesterday. I did not look as of today. Another thing that I think warrants mention is the density of the snowpack. Because we've received some high altitude rain, because temperatures have been warm, because we haven't, of course, gotten the snow itself, the snow that we do have is anomalously dense for this time of year. I'm concerned about that also. I'm sorry to be such a downer here, but I have to tell you about the things that are going on in our world. Because that's very likely at this point to lead to an early ripening of the snowpack, meaning that the snowpack is primed and ready to melt. Which doesn't, if we have early ripening of the snowpack, that tends to lead to a lower return on the snowpack when it all gets to our reservoirs. It spreads it out, and it winds up being a little bit of a less efficient mechanism for delivery. Something else that I mentioned to a reporter recently that's a concern is that we've got all this soil moisture that I'll talk more about in our mountains, but we don't have the snowpack on top of it. I'm concerned about an early melt, but we still have wet soils that'll promote a lot of forage, and then that will dry out for a really long time. The forest fire season is something to be watching based on the data that we're seeing. All right, precipitation story has been very different. Utah had really excellent precipitation in October. Of course, things have been really flat in January. We're currently close to normal statewide for precipitation going back to October 1st. If we look at the month-by-month progression of our precipitation, it's shown by the thickness of those bars on the left relative to normal on the right. You can see that the thick blue on the bottom there, that was October. And of course, the green there is January. We've been pretty flat in the month of January with the exception of the first few days of the month. I mentioned soil moisture. Our statewide soil moisture is doing very well in our mountains. We're currently at about the 80th percentile, which is excellent. You can see the basins around the state colored by percent normal for this time of year. Unfortunately, part of the reason why the soil moisture is so wet is because some of that came down as rain in our highest elevations instead of snow. And so where you see that really large boost right around the turn of the calendar year, that's a time that we typically would have been flat for soil moisture, and it got boosted up well above normal at that time. So we're happy for the soil moisture, but of course we need to recognize why we got to this point. Our reservoirs are still doing pretty well. We're about 62% of capacity. You can see the blue dot there. This is as of January 1st. This is now calendar years. You can see the previous 2 years are the lines that are above there, and then the previous 2 years before that are the lines that are below. Of course, the big boost in 2023 from the big snowpack season that we had. We're right in between where we were, as I'm trying to mention, from in the 2025-2024 cycle and then the previous cycle where we didn't have all that boost. The one area of the state that we continue to monitor in terms of the depletion compared to last year is the Upper Sevier. You can see the individual basins here. Last year is purple, and this year is green. And the one that's most drawn down relative to last year is the Upper Sevier, so that's something to watch. I'm going to be borrowing from a couple other agencies here. On the left side is from the USGS. You can see all the stream gauging locations in the state colored by percent normal. They have a little bit of a different scheme, but it's similar. Everything that's orange and red on their scheme, as you move to the right into the most recent days of January, we're getting into more and more anomalously dry conditions. And where you see that bright red, those are record low conditions for those stream flows. So obviously things have been worsening. And the drought map for the state of Utah as of today is shown on the right side. Most of the state is in D2, a couple spots of D3 on the map. Now, a big part of why we haven't gotten the snowpack has had to do with the precipitation that's come in. It hasn't been snow, it's been rain. This is a picture that I took on the way out to the meeting that I spent with William out in Vernal. This is Strawberry Reservoir, not frozen, which is disturbing to me. It should be disturbing to everybody. You can see for the state, the temperatures have bounced around quite a bit, but they have hovered at or above the range of previous observations multiple times, as you can see by the black line, which is a statewide graph. All right, so I hesitate to show any stream flow forecast this early in the season. They are very advisory only, and we know that there's a lot that can change between now and April 1st. What is shown here is the percent of average. Here I'm using average as my measure of central tendency. The percent of average stream flow that's been forecast for April through July at all the forecast points around the state, and you can see the basins are colored by the amalgamation of sites within those areas. I'm going to say with confidence that the February 1 forecasts are going to be substantially lower than what's shown on this diagram. Of course, we'll have more precise numbers here within the next week or so. One feature that I just wanted to point out, unfortunately this is last year's graph, so the data are not as positive this year, but I wanted to make sure that everyone was aware that you can now, on our map, when you're looking at our forecast points, you can click on those forecast points to get these evolution plots, which are pretty cool, and a nice way to track the evolution of where we think the expectations are for these forecasts. Something that I haven't talked about in this room yet, these guidance forecasts, which are brand new. These are very similar to what the CBRFC publishes. So these are unofficial mid-month forecasts that are being produced every 7 days for a variety of locations around the state. They're not being produced everywhere. They're just select locations around the state that these are being distributed. So this is the example for the Spanish Fork at Castilla. You can see the official forecast with the colored dots and how it's trended down since then. Same thing for Weber at Oakley. We had a little bit of boost based on that first week in January, and then things have trended down since then, and the next one should be coming out in the next, I think, day. One thing that I wanted to ask this room is if there's any locations around the state that you would really appreciate a guidance forecast to let me know. Again, we don't have the capacity to do that at all of our forecast points, but if there are specific locations that are most crucial, please let me know and I'll pass that along to our forecast team. So this is from our forecast team, some quotes, just comments on how unique and challenging this year's January 1 forecasts were and will continue to be. Notably higher precipitation than snow on the ground. Our forecasting system is probabilistic. It's a statistical relationship between what we've seen in our observations with precip and with snow water equivalent. And when one of those numbers is really high, like precipitation based on water that was received really early in the water year in October, but hasn't really been received as much since then, and the other number is really low, that's a pretty unusual circumstance, and there's no really good analogs for that to drive the modeling. And so the modelers have been really struggling with how to put together reliable forecasts. There's been great communication with the CBRFC and what they're seeing. They have a little bit of a different approach, so there's been some collaboration there. But unfortunately, we're lacking good analogs to this year to help make these forecasts more precise. Couple quick comments on the Great Salt Lake. I'm going to go a little farther on the Great Salt Lake today than I have in the past, so we'll see if Brian starts to throw things at me. The overall basin conditions are 60% of normal snow water equivalent, again, second percentile. Precipitation, very similarly, close to normal for this time of year, no big shocker there. Our January 1 lake level was 4191.4. We're currently about 1/10 of a foot higher than that as of yesterday. The projections from our January 1 forecast was that the lake would go up about a foot. Of course, that's a middle-of-the-road forecast. This is a probabilistic range that goes from about 0.2 feet to almost 2 feet. So sure, it's going to go from anywhere from 0.2 to 2 feet. That's pretty imprecise. But we want to at least have some kind of a ballpark middle value that we can use for these projections. Our February 1 projection is obviously going to be lower based on what we've seen in January. This is something new. This is looking at the inflow into the Great Salt Lake over time. And this is for the bars here, just to be clear, are for the entire calendar year, not just looking at the runoff season April through July, except for the one that I added on the right side. So there's a little bit of an apples to oranges thing going on here that I want to be clear about. But what's shown here is over the last 87 to 2025, what's come into the lake over time. And you can see 2023, you can see 2011 really jumping off the page. The average annual inflow, we anticipate the 2026 inflow to be substantially lower than average. The April through July forecast, for context, was about 410,000 acre feet, which again is just that runoff period. There's of course water that comes in outside of that, but for scale, I put that on the right side there just so you could get a sense for how low that is compared to previous years. And of course, that's just our 50th exceedance probability forecast, so there's others. If we just do some quick math and we talk about the Great Salt Lake recovery to get it up to that 4198 number, that's sort of a magic bottom end of this optimal range that we're hoping for. If we say the average annual inflow into the lake is about 1.3 million acre feet, which is that green line on the graph, the current lake storage is about 8.6 million acre feet. I've been a little bit more precise in my numbers on the screen. Of course, these are based on the rating curve estimates that other folks have developed. If the target is 4198, that would be about almost 5 million acre feet total water. That's about 4.87 or so million acre feet that would need to be added, which is the equivalent of about 3.7 years worth of annual flow. That's a lot of extra water. If we look at this year's runoff forecast, that's about 10 times more than we're saying is going to come in between April and July this year. So again, not trying to be grim, and I know these are kind of back of the envelope type numbers, but we I think need to be honest about what's coming. Now, speaking of what's coming, we do have some promise in the short-term weather forecast. I don't typically like to look much more than about 3 or 4 weeks out, and so that's what I've done here. I've included some information from colleagues. These are not from our office, but this is a nice forecast graph that was provided courtesy of Evan Thayer with Open Snow. I think does a nice job. I added the little guy with the fingers, by the way. But anyway, he nicely illustrated that we might get a little something that will dust the state February 2nd to 4th, but the big pattern change we're hoping for is coming hopefully around February 9th, February 10th, that you see on the right side of that graph. That's coincident with what's being predicted from the Climate Center. You can see the 3 to 4 week precipitation outlook does look positive. For northern Utah, we have to kind of grin and bear it, I think, until then. And then the long-term La Nina El Nino pattern seems to be transitioning to a neutral pattern over the rest of the winter, and then moving into an El Nino pattern for the remainder of the calendar year. So that time will tell if that actually provides any benefit for us. We don't have a really strong ENSO connection here, but I'm just providing that as hopefully fodder for our hopes. That's all I have. Happy to take any questions.